One of the less well-known features of Tailscale is something called app connectors. You can think of this a little bit like split DNS for specific websites on your tailnet. So, for example, let's say I wanted to route all the traffic for IP chicken out through a specific endpoint. So let's say I've got a VPS somewhere and I wanted all of the traffic that goes to IP chicken from any client on my tailnet to route through that droplet running on DigitalOcean to get the IPv4 address, not from where I'm currently sat, but from the droplet, wherever that happens to be. In my case, it happens to be in London. So in today's video, we're going to go through the basics of app connectors, hopefully start your gears turning about some of the fun things you can do when you can basically split the traffic across any number of websites using Tailscale app connectors. So I'll put a link in the description down below to the documentation for app connectors, and I highly recommend you read it, even if you've watched this video. There are a number of little steps you've got to follow, requirements to make sure that you can enable the app connectors. First of all, you need a piece of remote infrastructure through which you're going to route all of your traffic. Now, what are some of the use cases that might be useful for this kind of thing? Well, the obvious one that jumps out to me at least is, let's say you've got an enterprise GitHub and you want to whitelist that only certain pieces of infrastructure can connect into your enterprise GitHub deployment. With app connectors, you can effectively tell any client that's running Tailscale, well, to connect to the enterprise GitHub, you must go through this front door. Effectively, you can think of it almost a bit like a bastion host, a jump host, or some kind of way to specify the applications and how you connect to them specifically over your tailnet. So this is like I say, a very contrived example. I want to connect IP chicken here. I take my public WAN IP address and have it route out through a DigitalOcean droplet in London. So I'm here in America and the droplet's in London, and we're going to make it so that when I refresh this page, ipchicken.com, and I'm connected to my tailnet, it routes all of that traffic out through the droplet in London. App connectors are available for all plans, and if you'd like to learn more about bringing Tailscale to work, you can go to tailscale.com/BTW to find out how many of our customers have made the switch to Tailscale. But the first thing that you need to get ready to configure are the requirements for your tailnet policy file. We sometimes refer this to as your ACL file. But essentially, you need to create, first of all, a tag for the app connector. So if we jump over to tailscale.com and go to the admin console, and then under access controls, we just want to simply create these few lines here. So tag owners and then a tag. So I'm just going to call this UK connector. Next up, I'm going to save that policy file and go back to the documentation. We next need to add an auto approval policy so that we can approve routes for these app connectors automatically. And if we scroll down on the documentation page, we can find an example of the auto approver stanza that's actually required. So I'm just going to copy this straightforwardly and put it straight into my access policy file. I'm going to find a space near the bottom. In fact, I already have an auto approver stanza, so a little bit of modification is required here just to make sure the syntax is correct. You can see I've already got an auto approver here to automatically approve exit node requests. But in my case, I want to enable the routes to be auto approved for the app connectors, specifically for IP chicken, or at least the app connector tag that we just created at the top of the file. So if I scroll back up and look for, what did I call it? UK connector. And I want to put this in now into the auto approver stanza that's down here. You can see I've got separate lines for IPv4 addresses and IPv6 as well. So it doesn't matter if the target remote host that you want to proxy through and split the DNS through the app connector, whether it's an IPv4 or an IPv6 situation, both should work just fine. And now if I click save, oh, I've made a mistake here. Ah, yes, one too many brackets. Thank you very much. Copy and paste. All right, with that fixed, I'll just show you once again what the auto approver stanza now looks like. Nice and straightforward, I think. And if we jump back to the documentation one more time, we've got to create an access control policy that's going to allow us to route the specific application traffic through the app connector tag. This is because you must allow tailnet devices to access the routes that the app connector has created. So we're just going to copy and paste in here this auto group ACL option here. Essentially what this is going to do is make any device, any source device that is a member of your tailnet have access to the destination of the internet with a wildcard. So I'm going to look for the ACL stanza in my ACLs over here. Here we are. In fact, I probably, in my case, don't actually need to do this because I still have the default option of ACLs turned on, which is allow any source to any destination. So I'm actually just going to leave this one alone. If you've gotten fancy with your ACLs already, you will need to follow this step, but in my case, I don't. The next one is step 5, and this one's a little more involved, and actually I'm going to show you how to do this bit through the UI instead of doing it by copying and pasting into your ACLs file. So you may have noticed over the years that this little apps button up here, but maybe you've never quite known what to do with it. So what we're going to do is add an app. This is how you configure an app connector, and I'm just going to call this one IP Chicken. I'm going to select a custom. You can see all the predetermined things here like Okta, Salesforce, GitHub, Google Workspaces, Jira, and so on. Lots of really useful businessy type stuff here, but that's not what we're doing today. We're doing some custom hacking today. And I literally just want to type in ipchicken.com. And then I'm going to select the UK connector tag just here. Once I've done that, you'll see that it says needs action. Well, not least of which because there are no nodes on my tailnet that currently have that tag. So let's take care of that. Over on DigitalOcean, I created a brand new droplet. It's completely empty, has nothing installed on it whatsoever. So I'm going to go ahead and install Tailscale on that real quick. The fastest way to install Tailscale on Linux is to use this one-line bash command right here. Obviously, the risks of piping a script to bash to install things, you should always inspect the script to make sure that you've tested this stuff before you just do that. But for the purposes of my demo, I'm not too worried. All right, with Tailscale now installed, I should be able to do Tailscale up --SSH. This is going to ask me to authenticate this node to my tailnet, which we've done many times on this channel before, so I won't go into too much detail here. But essentially, I'm going to end up with a host named the DigitalOcean, lovely, simple to pronounce, Ubuntu, blah, 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 London 01. And that's going to become a node on my tailnet. Once that's there, I want to make sure that I've got the correct tags enabled because right now, this node is currently owned by tailscales@gmail.com. It's currently owned by me. But for an app connector to work, you've got to tag the thing. So the 3-dot menu over here on the right, we'll go to Edit ACL Tags. I'm going to select UK Connector and click Save. Next thing I'm going to do is go back to my DigitalOcean droplet and do Tailscale set -- advertise connector. This is going to turn on the app connector functionality as part of the Tailscale deployment. Now, you'll notice there are a couple of things we've got to take care of first. Of course, because we're doing a similar thing to what we would do with a subnet router, we're taking packets in on one interface and forwarding them out over that same interface. We've got to make sure that IP forwarding is turned on. And we can do that just by going to the Tailscale documentation, copying and pasting these few lines right here into your etc sysctl.d directory. So I'm just going to do that straight away. Just paste those in. Now that should be good to go. The other thing we're going to do is look at the Linux optimizations we can undertake for UDP performance. I don't think performance in our particular scenario is super duper important, but in for a penny, in for a pound, why not? So the first thing I'm going to do is just copy this ethtool command right here and paste this into my droplet. It's going to run a bunch of stuff in the background, no error messages, so I think we're good. By default though, changes made using ethtool in this method do not survive a reboot. So we're going to have to modify this file here in etc networkd dispatcher routable.d and create a file called 50-tailscale. Again, just copying and pasting this stuff from the documentation is all that's required. And then the final thing is just to check that we've successfully configured this stuff on the droplet. No errors occurred. So we should now be pretty much good to go. So I'm going to go back through my bash history with a Control R and look for advertise connector. And this time there was no error in the output. So we should now be in a position where we can try out our brand new app connector. And indeed, if we now go back to the apps tab in our Tailscale admin console, we can see that IP Chicken as a domain is now routing itself through the Ubuntu London 1 connection. Last seen at 406, it's now 407. So that looks good to me. Status is currently active. So here is my current IP address. I'm just going to blur out everything except for the last bit of 192. And hopefully when I refresh this page, it's now going to detect a network change. So it's just picked up the new routes and it's now going to come out through the DigitalOcean droplet. So let's verify this IP address ends in 24.243. Does this match our droplet? 24.243. It works. So we can do this now with a whole host of different websites. News websites are a particular one for me that I find pretty useful to route through. So I live in America these days. This is a very personal use case, but I still like to read the BBC now and again without adverts and all this kind of other stuff that happens to bbc.com. So I send bbc.co.uk through to my parents' house and it routes out through the server that I have running in England. And as we like to say in England, jobs are good'un. So that's a very quick overview of Tailscale's innovative app connectors feature. Think of it like split DNS for your Tailnet to route any application or any website out through any other piece of infrastructure that you would like. Take a look at the Tailscale Explained playlist that I'll link in the description down below as well for some of the other Tailscale features that we've covered on this channel. And until next time, thank you so much for watching. I've been Alex from Tailscale.